Hi there, and welcome to this Mad Sense video. In this one, I want to provide some of the what the bleep answers by giving you an outline of the mind strategies that I apply. I'm aware that I've spoken a lot about the problem so far. What I want to do is give you an idea of the scope of the solution. So you would have gathered, if you've watched the first episode and the phenomenology videos in particular, that what I try to do with this model is to help people who hear voices analyze the process, how they are responding to these stimuli, and then their situation. So the behaviors that are spilled over, have probably had some sort of impact on their life, and we want to assess those. So what we're going to do is analyze the process and the situation, and not the person. So you must remember that actually there are these components. There is the content, so this is what voices are saying, and later on I will add videos about how we can actually identify the stories that voices are using to engage us. So the things like conspiracy, religion, ancestors, aliens, all those typical kinds of stories and others. And then of course the process, which we've seen before. We're going to look at the stimuli and the context in which they're presented, the emotions that produces. You will look at our emotional systems, the response, so how we actually process information, and then of course the outcomes that we achieve from that, which are our interpretations and our experiences. So instead of focusing at this end, where it's all very different for everybody, we can actually focus at the process end at the top here, and if we can actually understand each individual's phenomenology in the right level of detail, we can get a much better idea of how this process is likely to flow towards particular interpretations. So the topics I want to cover in this video are just to talk about mapping the problem and the opportunity, and I'll provide one framework for doing both of those, in helping people recognize where they actually can take action, and that's in the process and in understanding how our emotional systems support information processing. We can then recognize that there is a bit of a journey to this recovery process, and that there are some decisions that need to be taken, and what one needs to do is create the conditions for success. You can anticipate what's going to happen and what you're likely to feel and experience through this process, and if you can do that, you can actually make it much less stressful. And then I will just introduce the remaining simple mind strategies. Some are discussed up here. The others are packaged together just simply. And of course, what they do is they address the problems on the previous slide, and then one or two things, of course, to take away from this video. So I want to use the kind of language of analyze. So analyze the process, not the person. So what we're doing here is we're framing a diagnostic rather than a diagnosis of the individual, if you want to make that distinction. Of course, a part of the problem, as I've mentioned in the first episode videos and in the phenomenology videos and in the belief videos, that one of the problems is that actually the kind of neuroplastic stuff, the information and emotion sort of mismatches, there's a lot of that we don't recognize. We don't even see it in ourselves. We don't necessarily know what themes we've developed sensitivities to. We know we have this belief, we're not quite sure how it derived. So what happens, let's say, with the current models is that actually, we don't really connect the experience to the diagnosis, because the diagnosis is this collection of symptoms, which is at the outcome end. And of course, it tells you nothing about the experience or what to do about it. And of course, I say then there's this sort of automatic harm, as the brain is actually programming based on these stimuli that we don't necessarily see. So the distortions in perception and in our associations, and the sort of information that's contaminated, and the distortion or contamination of our frames of reference, that stuff we don't necessarily see. What we can do, though, is pretty much every individual will relate to their experience. So if you show them how the experience is actually happening, and I hope you'll have seen that in some of the videos already, is a way to draw people in. And of course, that's the whole idea, is to get people to use their experience of the phenomenology and their story, and then map that to what it means for their real life story. So we can actually just shift the information we're using. We can use we can use as sort of inputs, if you like, people's understanding of their experience, and we can use a new framework to help them understand the problem and the solution differently. That's the objective. So I don't want to do this in detail here, but the model that I use that actually provides an anchor. This is something that is actually static. So as you've seen, voices are constantly raising a new frame of reference by throwing this little piece of information at you. What you need is a stable frame of reference. And that's really what this My Story model does. Just recognize that that's the main purpose of it. We'll discuss it more in another video. What it's doing is connecting body, so how we're actually taking care of the body, our activity, the mind, so the programs in our mind, and then of course how we map our experiences to our story. And what I want to do is give people this one framework on which they map their total experience, and are then able to map the two portions of that, the voices experience, so that relationship, and the outcomes and experiences that result from it, and then their real life, real world experiences which are building their life story. And I do that, say, in these 5 themes of self, me, my concept of self, my people, my relationships, people that are close to me, nearby, further away, my day, which is really my activity, how this relates to what I'm trying to achieve, and then just help people recognize that actually, if we're doing something that helps others, it actually produces stronger reward signals. So we can actually work with that and help change the process that way. And my corners are just about perception, so what we're seeing now, and then our concept of the world, what that means about our view of the world, and of course my relationship to it. So the purpose of this is to provide a stable frame of reference that I can easily call up at any time and use that to evaluate what's happening, rather than the context that voices have tried to engage me with. So that's the primary purpose of this model. It's used to map, as I say, the experience and the phenomenology, so we understand the problem. The frame of reference, the story frame stays the same. As we make progress, we're populating it with new information so that we can see progress and actually see results and connect to our reward system in a systematic way. And then I encourage people to use a diagnostic that kind of summarizes that, and this is simply a solution-based self-diagnostic. So I'm using this story model that we've just discussed as the context. So in reference to this, I then ask people to assess their experience of distress, so the experience in the mind. How distressful is it? It's either high or low, and then the impact on their story, which is either high or low. And what happens is people will actually map to one of these 4 sort of boxes, and each box basically indicates a level of effort and the direction, if you like, of that effort that one would actually put in, to achieve better outcomes over here. And of course, this is all centered around a common theme. No matter which box you land up in, you put yourself into here. There's a sort of common theme of reframing how I look at the problem, and that's the sort of mapping exercise, and then resetting our information and emotional systems, which are part of the tools, the tools later on. But so this is based on assessing the impact on my story and how distressing I experience it in the mind, so which points to the kinds of intervention and the level of effort required in each of those 4 zones, for want of another description. So having been through that sort of mapping exercise, mapping phenomenology, mapping story, mapping experience, those are the 3 common dimensions that people might map. What one wants to do then is to say, okay, I've now identified the problem and I have an idea of what it is I need to do. So how do I create the conditions for success? So this is actually understanding the recovery journey. There's a fairly common thread to it. The emotions associated with it will be different depending on primarily the duration of exposure to this phenomenon. Of course, the longer we've had it, the more we've accepted it and acclimatized to it and appeased it, the more neuroplastic harm it would have done. And of course, if you have a relationship with your voices for sort of 15 years, and of course you're now looking to say, well, how do I interrupt it? You've got to want to do that first of all. You've got to recognize actually that you want to do something. You've got to want to do something different, which is the reason for mapping the problem. And now having done that is how do we make the journey forward successful? And the basic components are that we need to recognize that voices are responsive. They will actually change, as we do new things. Voices will find new ways to bother us, basically. And the whole idea is to push them into the corners of your life, as I have done. It may require, addressing the fundamental fear, because actually voices are provoking fear all the time. And it's because they're operating in this world of uncertainty, and you can minimize that uncertainty. But even if your voices decide to be very aggressive, as mine did, there are ways to actually just to make facing the fear a whole lot easier by creating the kind of the secure conditions in which to do it. And of course, the other extreme is with mania. The thing about mania is that it's actually pleasant while it's happening. It's actually, 6 or 7 weeks later, when your manic episode has sort of faded, you then ask yourself, well, gee, how did that contribute to my life story, to making my world a better place? So what we're going to do is learn to recognize it early and interrupt it sooner, and actually recognize that although it's pleasant, it's not really adding value to my story. Then there's this process of understanding the journey and the decisions it requires. So out of the mapping exercise, one will understand, where one is on that sort of diagnostic frame, which points to the kinds of decisions one needs to take. Once you know that, you can sort of garner some support and actually coach people in the kind of support that you need, because you may not get it right first time. You may need to try a couple of things more than once, and it's very useful in some cases if you have some support around you. So that's the sort of preparation work. And then there's a piece about getting your mind straight, for want of another description. So this is part of the reframe. So this is getting my attitude right, towards doing this. And I call it sort of divorcing your voices, because what you're doing is you're changing the terms of the relationship between yourself and voices. And you're doing this very, very deliberately by asserting your rights and principles, because in the same way that the story map is a static frame of reference, the rights and principles that you assert are the things that shape all of your emotions, not just with voices, but they're actually shaping your responses to all of your frames of reference, so how you're experiencing life. So it's important to reset them. And I have some sort of tools for doing this, for changing the relationship with voices by caricaturizing them, minimizing them, by conducting a sensitivity analysis. If you've been, as I said, I developed sensitivities during this experience, to technology and other themes. I didn't actually recognize them that well until I connected how they worked together to undermine my goals. So I have a mapping tool that helps people recognize that for those that need it. And as I mentioned, choosing positive principles and beliefs, which is about resetting our emotional systems. And then, there are the tools and techniques for creating good experiences in my mind. This is based on the neurolinguistic programming. I don't expect people to take a course in neurolinguistic programming. I've actually designed the NLP into the tools and made them very, very simple, so that they provide a way to respond immediately. That's just that based on the principles and theory of NLP. And then what one does is use mindfulness. Basically, this is in the interrupt replace phase, where I'm actually interrupting the stimulus and deciding what I want to replace it with. What we can do is actually work with our mind processes here to build trust, and faith in the world. And we do this just simply by using our confirmation bias. And then, as I've mentioned already, we use the My Story anchor again here. So in the mindful response, we want to make a connection between our mindful response and my story. And if we do those things, actually results will follow, and individuals will see an improvement, and this will become self-reinforcing and automated. So my voices still bother me all day. I just have this automated response. that's going on in the background all the time. I'm amazed actually how the mind is capable of doing this. And when I step back and look at it and I think, gee, what a waste of effort. And probably once a week or so, I go and stand outside and vent a little because I'm frustrated with it and can't be bothered. But that's an awful lot better, than actually retreating, to a life that's actually, not very pleasant at all. So just to give you some confidence that actually the theory that's being applied is very, very simple. So I have the theory here at several levels. I have a level, if you like, for people who hear voices, and I'm simply saying at that level, you need to be able to respond quickly. You need to be able to respond immediately, and for that, you need a very, very simple version of the model. If you're in service delivery or in research, there's a more complex version of this model, and actually the whole point of that is that the model is predictive. And for that, we might need the greater deal of the greater level or detail of theory, and of course, you might need it for special cases. So I mentioned in my introduction video, I think, that my response to voices is based on my practice of neuro-linguistic programming. You might actually call it mindfulness. There are lots of similarities to it. And so what NLP teaches you is that you can access your programs simply by recognizing at a point at which you're not comfortable with them, basically. And it might be an emotion, it might be an activity. As long as you can identify a point in the program, which is just a habit, it's a cycle of habit, that you're actually, not enjoying, then you can actually interrupt it and replace it. So say people are generally identifying it at an emotion or at an outcome. And what NLP simply says is that these patterns and habits can be interrupted and you can replace them with something new to achieve a happier outcome. Of course, what's happening when you hear voices is you have these very, very weird stimuli. And of course, this reaction to it is very, very quick because it's based on our expectation of it over here. So, what we want to do is actually reduce our sensitivity to it, number one, and that's one of the tools. And the other one is to bring this interrupt as early as possible. So you learn actually pretty quickly to bring this interrupt and replace much earlier. And in fact, you get to the point where you're able to do some preventive work and some work to actually preempt the opportunities that voices take to abuse this process. So what voices are really doing is that, if drives to are our sort of normal operating systems, we're doing something to achieve an outcome. And what voices are doing, by invoking this unpleasant reaction, is they're shunting us into our monitoring system. So instead of focusing on outcomes, we're actually focusing on the stimulus and threats that it actually presents. So what you want to do is interrupt that and just push yourself back up into the proper emotional systems. And if you're able to do that, this is how you build confidence, security, resilience. If you're able to achieve in the experience in the mind, satisfactory outcomes in the mind, you would literally experience them physically. You experience that as an emotion. It's a transactional thing, lots of small transactions adding up to a big result. And it's fairly straightforward. There's a relationship between the emotional systems and the principles or information that satisfy them. And these are the things you want to work towards. So instead of understanding the detail of each of our emotions, all we need to do is understand the emotion that we're heading to. We find our emotions very, very difficult to understand and to describe. And this gets around that problem by saying, actually, all we need to understand is the emotion the emotional system we're trying to satisfy, basically. And it is only these three, and anybody can learn this language. So the soothe system is satisfied by us doing the right thing, and that kind of builds optimism. It builds trust in each other. It builds hope. All of those kinds of things. So if we're able to satisfy the soothe system, and we do this by deliberately working towards satisfying this principle. The drive system is our sense of our ability to act, our ability to mediate our way through the world. And of course, the way we want to do this is we want to do it right. We want to do it in a way that satisfies me and satisfies you with respect. So the way to do that is to actually, is to do it right. And if we're able to do this, what it does is it builds confidence. And if you can recognize that actually we're doing this, and you can mindfully say, I'm satisfying this system, I'm satisfying this system, you will actually be amazed at how you're able to build up confidence and optimism just in the response in the mind. And if you get it right in the mind, it generally follows in life, in the actual outcomes when you express it. So of course, the whole idea with the monitoring and sort of threat system is to avoid engaging it. So what this is about is preventing and anticipating, and you do that by creating the right conditions. So you think ahead, you plan, you think through potential problems before they happen. You understand the consequences, you minimize them, and doing that builds security. And of course, these ideas are all built into the tools that I'll show you in a minute. And if you get all three of these right, basically, you get to the point where you're getting things right the first time. So that's the long-term, objective. And the whole idea is actually to see progress towards that, recognize that you're satisfying all three systems, and that then is stimulating your reward signals in a progression, because that's the other thing you want to do, it not just at a point in time, but progressively. So quickly here then, I'm going to summarize the tools, the sort of mind strategies that I've converted into tool format that do what we've just discussed in these last two slides. They offer the interrupt, they bring it early, and they offer ways to do some preventative work and anticipate problems. There are 6 of them. Three of them are based on the same idea anyway. Just this interrupt and replace, they're just applied in slightly different ways. So these are actually very, very easy for anybody to learn and to apply. So the first one is a bit of a fun exercise. As I've mentioned in a lot of the other videos, what voices do is they assert significance and they steal mind share. So what you want to do is work against that. And of course, what you want to do is have an instant response, and you want to have a practiced response so that you can automate it very, very easily. So that it's something, the start of the response is always the same, basically. That's what you're heading for. Number one. Number two, what you're doing is you're using the same thing to change the relationship with voices, to kind of minimize their scariness and to literally own the relationship with them. And I do that by naming what's going on and naming the actual voices. So I have 3 voices that have claimed front row seats in my life, which is the language that they actually use. This is the one that wanted to be God. This is the one that wanted to be the devil. This is one that was just one of the minions in the background that just irritates me. So what I did, as I said, you won't be God, the devil, and these other characters that you claim you might be. You're just this bunch of I tell yous instead of I love yous. I have some voices kind of saying I love you. So what I'm going to do is actually, this one I've called Squealy because he has this whiny voice that sort of is a sort of body language that's designed to embarrass me, just the tone of what he says and how he says it. So he's become Squealy. I cut him off at the knees by simply saying, the moment he opens his mouth, I say, Squealy, no, we're not doing this today. This is what I'm going to do. That's the basics of it. I have made Squealy a much less scary character, than you claim to be. And it's the same for the other voices. So, and I use caricatures because what that does is it exaggerates the worst in voices. And of course, I can make it, minimize it. I can give them childish names, and I can use that in the response all the time. So the response all the time is this interrupt. It's the interrupt and replace. And I'm simply saying what you need to do is recognize actually that you own the response. And that's the point at which you can act, and that's actually to interrupt it. And then the replace is something that you do with using mindfulness. So you choose your response in a fairly deliberate way. You relate it to the story you're trying to achieve, to what's going on around you, to what you're trying to enjoy. And then also you apply it to any themes to which you've developed an emotional sensitivity. So I mentioned that I've developed emotional sensitivities. Some people will have sensitivities based on their prior history, particularly people who've been abused as a child, and then abused by the system, and then abused by voices, and then abused by the stigma of society. That's a pattern that's got sort of 4 multiples of sensitivity. And I'm saying you can actually map those, and as part of your emotional reset, what you need to do is actually work through the accumulation of bad emotional signals, through this process, because voices will actually be aggravating those sensitivities. They'll be making you more sensitive to them by throwing the stuff at you and jabbing you on your sore spots, basically. So this is the idea of applying the response in a deliberate way. Let's say it's either creating a good transaction in the mind, bringing my focus to the real world, to my story, or on fixing a problem that I've developed through this process. The next one, the other 3 are things that you use in preventative mode. The one is to focus on the body, because what happens through this cycle is you accumulate chronic stress, and we don't sort of realize it. But when you learn to sort of focus on the body, you can actually learn to do things about it. The biggest part of this, actually, I find the best approach is to focus on breathing, because along with chronic stress comes a different rate of breathing, a different kind of breathing. We breathe higher, we breathe shallower. And the body is one of the quickest ways to access your emotional systems. So this is about using breathing techniques to create the right sort of conditions and mind-body coherence. That's fancy language. All we need to do is actually teach people some breathing exercises, and to recognize their breathing pattern, and then to recognize the stress in the body. I say there are some very simple ways of doing it, also more sophisticated ways of doing it. There are plenty of heart rate variability apps out there that are so simple. All you're doing is actually connecting to a heart rate monitor, and people are simply going through using visual feedback to get their breathing right. I mean, that's just one way of doing it. There's many ways to do this. Another is this idea of the interrupt and replace in preventative mode. So one of the things I do with my voices every morning, actually I don't do it quite as habitually anymore. I did for a long time. I did this for a good couple of years. I simply play my day through in advance. So because I find voices are attracted to stress, they're not creating it. They're not, it's not that stress is triggering them. Voices are creating stress. Sorry, I was getting that back to front. Voices very much create stress by coming along and being more aggressive, at important events in my day. So, if I have a meeting, or even just doing this video, for example, my voices badger me beforehand. It's just an irritation. But actually what you can do to minimize that stuff is you can actually just think through your day. I do this in the shower every morning. It takes a couple of minutes, and I literally have a conversation with my voices. So I will say, oh, Squealy, or oh, Tutu. She's usually the one that tries to intervene in the things I'm doing. This is what I've got on today. I've got 2 important meetings. They'll go well because of this. And what's the worst that can happen if they don't go well? So I scope out why it will go well. I practice it in my mind. And then I say to voices, actually, this is the worst that can happen if it goes wrong. So I'm minimizing the consequences of it being a disaster. I actually know what the worst case is. And that sort of avoids, what voices do is this kind of escalating the problem and exaggerating it and making it seem far worse. The risks seem far higher than it actually is. And you can apply the same thinking to the potential for an acute event. So an acute episode of panic is an event that could be induced, if you like, by voices. And what you can do, of course, this has the risks that you're going to end up going back into some institution, or you're certainly going to get your friends and family very, very worried. And actually, I think we make a big song and dance of this when it's really not that important in the bigger scheme of things in our story. For me, the worst case scenario of an acute attack is that I spend 2 days in bed. I take tranquilizers for a couple of days. I've coached a couple of friends that if I call them in a bit of a panic, what they need to do is ask if I've got my tranquilizers. I need to ask if there's anything in my diary or my calendar that I need to get done, because if it's not taken out of my calendar or done, it will worry me, and even on tranquilizers, I'll get up and do it. And then offer me some reassurance, offer to bring me chicken soup and check in on me that night. I mean, that's how I deal, with preventing and the stress associated with the potential of an acute attack. I just don't make it a big deal. I've only really had one, maybe two actually, kind of incidents of this in the last 6 years. And the key thing that's going on here is that I've actually put the information in the form of a plan in my mind, so that it's actually accessible if I get pushed into my threat system. The whole point, of course, though, is to avoid that. And of course, that's what all these other tools are doing. So it is only the suite of the story tool, which we're using to map, the understanding of the process and the emotions, and these 6 tools. And then they say the diagnostic, which is used to assess which of the 4 boxes I might put myself into. And I can use those same 4 boxes basically to assess any adverse events. As I try different things and voices get more aggressive, some of those might spill into behavior or discomfort, again, at as an experience of distress. And we can use the same 4-box matrix as an adverse event model to assess the emotional distress and the impact on my story, and use that to learn and from whatever was adverse about that actual event, and use that then to move forward. So evaluating these against these 2 axes, say, keeps perspective, and it kind of points you towards what you need to do to fix the problem. So that's the basics of the overall recovery model, if you like, and the tools. What I'll do in subsequent videos is I'll pick out each of the elements of that and do them in more detail. I'm going to try and add one a week. So thanks for watching this video. Oh, I've got one more slide to put in here. I'm simply saying that the whole objective of life is to love life, laughing out loud. And that's a right that we need to reassert, because this is what voices are getting in the way of for me. Voices have knocked my quality of life significantly. They knocked my ability to simply enjoy what I was doing every day. They changed my perception of the world. They got in the way, literally, of everything. And I'm saying that actually success lies in creating healthy transactions in the mind, and that's what these tools are doing. We can choose healthy principles that then satisfy our emotional systems, and that's the piece we want to focus on. It's getting our emotional systems right again, so that our emotions are a true compass, that they're registering true, real emotions. We can prevent a lot of drama by thinking through stuff and thinking ahead, and by minimizing the intensity of our reaction to what voices are actually doing. We can use the tools to properly engage our reward systems by using mindfulness in the response. And of course, what that does is a healthy mind leads to a healthy body, and you'll notice actually a lot of the chronic stress falling away. So you'll be pleased to know that having fun is actually the best thing that we can do, because that will satisfy our emotional systems. So thank you for listening to this video. Once again, it's this kind of stuff, the recovery model and tools, that I want to keep free on the site for people who have voices. If you can help me do that, please find my fundraiser, Someone You Know Hears Voices, on crowdrise.com. If you'd like to comment, please use this hashtag .madsense. Sorry, just hashtag madsense. There's no dot in it. If you'd like to work together, if you're in service delivery and would like to work together to implement this at scale, reach me on greg@mad-sense.com. Sign up on my website, subscribe to this channel, and as I've mentioned before, there are these other organizations in the space that also work off donations. So Intervoice, Mad in America, and the others would also value support. So if you can, we very much value your help. Thank you.